Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. G'day, welcome to episode 30 of the Passive House podcast. My name is Matthew Cutler-Welsh. I'm coming to you from Auckland, where it's day two of the America's Cup racing today. Very exciting.
Yeah, how's that going?
1 for 1 so far. So Team New Zealand took out the first race, and then the Italians got the second one. So it's exciting. You know, it's better to have something in it rather than just a whitewash of one team and totally one-sided.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that sounds fun.
But who knows? By the time that you're listening to this, could be all over.
Yeah, right. So I'm Zach. I'm in Seattle, and we're not enjoying a sailing competition, but the days are getting longer, and the COVID is my mom. We're going to talk about this in the interview. My mom came over the first time in a year. It was able to come inside and hug the kids and stuff. So she's vaccinated.
I'm super excited to get to that because there's a lot to get out of this week's interview. It's an amazing chat. So let's move along. So who do we got some people to thank for bringing the podcast out to people's ears?
Yes, absolutely. So everything we do at the Accelerator is thanks to the support of our sponsors. Our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel, Minotaur, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA.
Very good. And yeah, my thanks go out to them. It's great to have that support. I know there's so many people out there doing really great things and lots of people asking for money and support. I'd also like to do a shout out for all those volunteers and people who give up their time as part of the happy hour and the Tech Tuesday. People that host those events really contribute to the community as well, and wouldn't be the same without them.
No, it's so true.
Let's talk about Laura Nettleton. What a woman.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing. I've known Laura for many years now, and she's a mentor and a friend, and just, she's so much wisdom.
Wisdom is definitely a great word. It's something that popped into my head. I really enjoyed listening to this interview. This morning I was out, our days are getting shorter here, so it was dark for most of my walk this morning, but I just had this warm glow. There are some times when I listen to an interview where occasionally somebody says something and you kind of get goosebumps. After the third time that happened, I stopped counting on this interview. There were just so many great points that Laura said. I kind of want every architect, every architectural student to listen to this. It's just, there's some great wisdom in there. Do you want to give us a quick intro as to who Laura is and why everyone should listen to her?
Yeah, absolutely. So Laura is an architect. She's got 30 years experience in sustainable architecture development and community engagement. She's the founder of Thoughtful Balance, an architectural and consulting firm that's devoted to cutting-edge, sustainable, and high-performance design solutions. She's dedicated to the communities and individuals she serves, which I think comes out through her conversation in this interview. And she's also, for years, been actively involved in spreading the word about Passive House. She founded Passive House Western Pennsylvania, a group dedicated to information and advocacy for Passive House in the Western Pennsylvania region, including Pittsburgh, where she lives. And her work in Passive House retrofits is really unparalleled in the US. She's a pioneer in that area. She believes that sustainability and low energy design should be affordable and available to everyone. And as we'll hear, she takes great comfort in the fact that cultures can radically change because we know we need to radically change. So please enjoy my conversation with Laura Nettleton. Well, Laura, this is a real pleasure. I've long been an admirer of your work in passive house architecture and the leadership you've been playing in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania and beyond. And like many in the North American passive house community, I first became aware of your work through that powerful conference presentation that you were making years ago that challenged this idea that high performance retrofits had to mean high cost. And that in fact, you were experiencing perhaps the opposite. So can we start by you telling us that story?
Sure.
Great.
So I was lucky enough to have a client, Action Housing, who introduced me to I had heard of Passive House, but I hadn't kind of immersed myself in it. And they hired me to do a prototype house that was a house that they wanted to be able to replicate for sort of infill housing. And that was when our little firm did the first passive house in our region, single family. And this same group had just purchased an old YMCA in McKeesport, and it had 84 legal units. It had actually many more than that, but 84 legal units, and the bills were $60,000 a month. I mean, wow. I'm sorry, a year. And they weren't going to be able to keep the building and keep the residents in some kind of housing unless they reduced that energy number. And so we felt all emboldened. We'd just done this single family house. And she said, do you think we could do a retrofit? They do retrofits in Europe. And we sort of said, oh yeah, we could do a retrofit. we sort of jumped in the deep end of the pool without really knowing how to swim. But this is affordable housing. And, we were worried about issues like controlling bed bugs. And we knew that we couldn't afford anything more than paint for the floor. So, we had this kind of double whammy of we had this ultra low budget, but we had these ultra high aspirations. So we looked very decidedly at the shell as almost one project, and then the interior as another. And we had goals for that project. They had gang bathrooms, and people were peeing out the window because they didn't want to be in a bathroom with another person. So, we wanted to make individual bathrooms, and there was no place anybody could make food. They could only go to food pantries. So we wanted to add kitchens. It was 4 floors of interconnected stairs. There was no elevator. We wanted to add an elevator. Mm-hmm. There was no ventilation air. There was no air conditioning. Those were all things that we wanted to add. So we had, we wanted to improve the life of the residents, but we had really, really, really a bare bones budget. And so, it was just a nail biter all the way. We did Michael Wartnaby, who was in my office at the time, did the PHPP model in-house, and we used Building Science Corporation as our consultants. And they led us through, helped us generate a wall section that we were pretty comfortable with. Lots of people have had objections to that wall section because it uses spray foam as an air sealing agent. But we actually it was the only thing that we could afford. And it was the only thing that our brick would allow. So it was a combination of the building science and the budget intersecting and giving us that solution. And so we studied all the sort of special details. We had a slab that came out and hit the exterior wall. And, that was an opportunity for thermal bridging and condensation. And so we did some therm calculations on that. And then we waited for the bids to come in, and we were in design development, and we got something from the contractor. And he did what a lot of contractors do. He went to his old projects, not really understanding what passive house was. And so he added up all the numbers for the wall section, and then he threw a typical HVAC number at it and said, "You're wildly over budget," right? So we were really worried about it, and we went back and we cut things out. And when the final bids came in, we had a lot of trouble on the HVAC front. Mechanical contractors not really believing that we'd get the building walls to perform the way we were predicting in the model. So we had to sign some waivers that relieved them of responsibility other than for their actual work that they were doing. But we took all those chances, and when the bids actually came in, they came in right where they should be. There was like no value engineering to do. And so that told me, okay, we can do this, and it also is just a clear demonstration of how the mechanical equipment pays for the wall, right? It was so clear in the numbers. Now, the thing that's kind of unfortunate, we had a contractor who hadn't drunk the Kool-Aid, which is another sort of cool thing about the project, but also sort of sad, because I didn't have someone that was willing to sit there and do a whole other takeoff of a traditional building. And so I don't have great data of, side by side numbers of passive house, not passive house kind of thing. But the cool thing is the guy had never heard of passive house and wasn't particularly interested in it, but was interested in making his client happy. And he's, fine contractor. And we, we got there. That was 2013. And the hard thing about it was a really tight budget. They had a lot of the people all sleeping in one room. So they had some large rooms, and we did phased construction. It was phased construction in a partially occupied building. So we couldn't do a blower door test until the very end, because we had, you couldn't block it off. I mean, one part was open and being occupied, and they were connected by a basement. And so it was just like, what do we do? And so we started blower door testing each unit individually to make sure that we were at least kind of getting reasonable readings. And then we waited for the blower door test, and you're supposed to have for retrofit one at ACH 50, and we came in at 2, and the owner was kind of frantic because there were a lot of residents that were moving into rooms, and a lot of those folks have mental health issues, and so didn't want to have their windows be closed, that kind of thing. So we're not even sure that we really were at 2, but nevertheless, we failed that blower door test. But the thing that's really cool, I recently asked the owner for utility data, and our EUI there is 23.
Wow.
That's pretty damn good, And so that's something that I feel really proud about. Now, we were all interested in sustainability, wanting to do the right thing. So we made an all-electric building. And we saw a 68% reduction in energy use from the original building, even though we added elevator, kitchen equipment, air conditioning, ventilation, air, new lighting. I mean, we really upgraded the facility and upgraded the plug loads and potential for plug loads right with it. So 68% of the energy we saved, but we only saved something like 30% of the money. And that was because we went all electric. The cost of electric was more than the cost of gas and uncharacteristically high for where it had been historically. And so, now in retrospect, knowing that Pennsylvania burns coal, should we have gone all electric? Who knows? I think we were wanting to do the right thing. Did we do the right thing? Who knows, really? But so the money case wasn't as good. Their bills are now down to like $35,000, $40,000 a year, but still a lot better than they were. And the energy use is really kick-ass. So that was my first experience with this does not have to cost more. And then when I was working with NK Architects, I think you were the one that plotted a chart of all of the PHFA data from that year. So my project was the first project that was in the PHFA pipeline that aspired for Passive House, but it wasn't part of the PHFA regulations. And then the following year, when PHFA made it part of their allocation plan, a group of projects wanted to do Passive House. And so a comparison of that data of projects that were applying for Passive House right along with projects that weren't applying for Passive House, and you plotted them all out on a chart, you were unable to distinguish which ones were Passive House and which ones weren't, which told me, okay, it's not just me. Everybody can do this. But I do have some thoughts about that, which is that not everybody can do this, because if you go to, say, a traditional architect with a traditional agenda and a traditional process, who does not make Passive House one of the has to have, like you design your little scheme and you think, okay, there are these things that we're going to do for the occupants of this building, and some of them are spatial and some of them are, physical needs, and some of them are, building performance issues. If that doesn't get prioritized right at the beginning, it's always going to cost more because you're adding it on. It's not part of the basic assumption. So, if you have a will to do it, there's a way to do it. But unless you have that will, it's always going to cost more. And so you're going to get these two different camps that are talking about, oh, Passive House definitely costs more. And then other people that say, oh, it really doesn't. Now, the place that it does cost more is in soft costs, because you're spending time to do the energy model and you're spending time in the QA/QC to do the blower door testing. And so that's a little bit more. But what I think that architects really need to take on that responsibility, along with, sort of a level of craft. And unfortunately, I think we've, in the green building world, we've made green buildings too precious. And so a lot of people's approach is sort of to say, want to design a Passive House? Wouldn't that be cool? And, a lot of owners don't want to go on your ride. They want to go on their ride. And so, you're opening yourself up to hear, no, I don't want that. I don't want to pay for it. I don't want to try it. I don't want to do it. But if it's the way you design and that's just what you do, then, and that's how we make buildings, then it's not a question anymore. I mean, I've never had a client dictate a wall section to me. That's really what Passive House is about. And if you say, well, I'm not going to make you a leaky building that costs a lot to operate and gets moldy and has health issues, I'm going to design you a better shell, longer lasting, lower utility bills, and healthier. I think it's all in the way we present it. And I was lucky enough to realize that pretty early, back when I was starting to do lead buildings and had some spectacular failures with clients, and realized I had a person come to the door, and she was selling me some religious literature, and I wasn't taking it. I wasn't interested. But I realized when I closed the door that she was so earnest in what she thought and what she believed and how she was reaching out to me. And that was just like me. I was doing that to my clients. Don't you want to do a lead building? Wouldn't that be great? And, it just had to become part of me and part of what I offered. You work with me. This is what I do. And then the whole world changes, right? You're not asking someone to be a guinea pig. You're just, if they chose you, they have the confidence in you to do the right thing.
I want to go back real quick and let people know that PHFA is the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, and you're referring to the process or the decision making that they use to award low-income housing tax credits to affordable housing projects. And I think what you're saying makes so much sense about these two camps and the importance of just that this is how we do things, and this is how we do things from the very beginning. I think that's one of the things that has been really powerful about the PHFA policy, is that developers and project teams came in with, at the very, very beginning, trying to make Passive House pencil into their projects and make it make sense. So it was that mindset, and that resulted in this little or no construction cost delta between Passive House and conventional construction. So
And there it is.
It really
Again,
resonates.
where there's a will, there's a way, right?
Right.
And we saw it across a broad spectrum of people. They all wanted those points, so they were all going to do it.
Yeah.
And they all did it, and they all did it for the price.
Yeah.
It's just funny how that works.
It really is. And similar narrative in Belgium, right? With the Brussels, you hear Sebastian from A2M talk about the fact that there are a couple of camps. There are the architects that just know how to do it. They do it every day. And there's no cost difference. But there are others who are like, absolutely, there's a cost difference. And
Right.
It's a very different mindset. Yeah.
It is. Well, and then, it's interesting. We've gone on and done it again and again. We've done large scale retrofits that, relative to their counterparts, really, really didn't cost anything more. And so I knew that it wasn't just a one and done example because I was doing an SRO versus a multifamily housing project. I know that NAPHN has a really cool slide out there that talks about the levels of insulation versus density in a building. And there are pictures of sort of little single family houses and 12-inch to 14-inch thick walls. And then as you get taller and taller with greater density, the need for insulation and wall thickness goes down. And that's a really good correspondence with cost too. You can, they're talking about R value and insulation, but if you really think about the cost of projects, Passive House definitely costs more when you're in the single family realm. And so, that makes it especially relevant that anything over a single family house should definitely be Passive House.
Yeah.
It's kind of unconscionable not to do it.
Right. The form factor, right? The relationship between the surface area and the volume gets so much more advantageous as you get into a larger building. And so the investment in the building envelope, it's Passive House's envelope first. The investment in the building envelope is proportionally much smaller. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
And you were on the forefront of discovering that in the trenches on some of the first big projects. So what about air quality? I know you've been both on the projects. I'm sure you have some observations about the impact on indoor air quality, but I know that you've also been part of the RAUCUS study in the reducing outdoor contaminants in indoor spaces study in Pittsburgh. And what have you found about Passive House and air?
Well, I was in the RAUCUS study, and I learned a lot about air quality while I was doing it. I lived for about 6 months with air quality monitors all over my house. I live in a valley in Pittsburgh that's very low, and I was really alarmed to learn that it sits kind of, a ways away, but down below an elevated highway. And I was really alarmed to learn how poor my air quality was. It was the poorest in the cohort. They didn't have anybody that was quite as bad as me. And so there were, a whole bunch of things that I learned. But, I had heard through European sources that air quality testing they had done in Europe was far superior. And so I tried implementing some of that in some of the projects that I've done here. And I worked with Anjanette Green from Reset and Craig Stevenson from Oros Group. And they installed sensors into a couple of projects that we did. And looking at the data is really interesting. And we installed them in the Morningside project, which is an affordable housing project. And the location that we were kind of forced to use out of really unimportant reasons, but were 2 units. And so I was kind of worried that the air quality within units would fluctuate wildly with cooking. And, we were all set up for success, and we'd planned for ventilation air to kick on when the range hoods kicked on. But, was that actually going to work, and what were our statistics going to be like? And then we also put them in the Carnegie Library. And what we found was that for most of the targets, we were 85 to 90% hitting those targets, sometimes 100% of the time. The targets that reset air sets, which are the most stringent kind of air quality measurements, I think, that exist in green building, and what all the green building, WELL and LEED and the major green building rating systems are adopting as their standards. So you get, for free, you get fantastic air quality, which is a really, really cool thing. The other thing that was interesting to see on that was something else that I really want to investigate. And I've been talking about writing a paper about it, but I haven't gotten around to it with Galen Stengel. But in the library, the set temperatures, the design temperatures that we used were actually higher and lower than the norm. In other words, the air conditioning was set to go on at a higher than normal temperature, and the heat was set on to go on at a lower than normal temperature. So when you look at the temperature values for reset, we were out of compliance 100% of the time. But we've never had a complaint about thermal comfort, which I think is really interesting, right? So you're in a library, got all kinds of different kinds of clientele. You've got people that work there, and we've even asked, is anybody uncomfortable? No one's uncomfortable. So set temperatures are the other thing that we really need to address. I mean, our limits of thermal comfort are too strictly interpreted. It's like interpreted. It's like the hottest person should never be hot, and the coldest person should never be cold. And so, we just really need to rethink all that.
Do you think that the even surface temperatures that we talk about in Passive House allows for a broader
absolutely
range? Yeah, because of the
absolutely.
you have less discomfort from radiant. Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I think even, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a Passive House conference in the summer and ended up, wearing a sweater or a jacket.
Yeah, they're always in these horrible hotels. Yeah.
Right. They're like, what are we doing?
We're patiently waiting for that Passive House conference in a Passive House hotel.
So I wanted to tell you about one of the first retrofits that I worked on. When about 1999, I was working in Perkins Eastman, and I was working with a fellow named Scott Fitzgerald. And Scott and I were working on our first LEED project, and we did something called the Felician Sisters Convent, which got a gold rating, and one of the first ones in Pittsburgh, and we were all proud about that. And it was a really great project. And it was for a group of sisters that were age 75. Their average age was 75, and there were 77 of them living in this facility at the time. And so we did not hit anything close to energy targets that we were hoping for. In fact, it was my biggest disappointment in terms of the LEED structure, because we promised great reduction in cost to the sisters, but we didn't deliver. And I hate being in that position of not delivering for a client. And it was really interesting when that project was finished, and this is what got me started on air quality. When that project was finished, they had an in-house nurse, because the frail age of the sisters. And she came up to me and she said, "What did you do in this building?" And I said, what do you mean? And she said, "Well, I mean, I usually have a dozen sisters in the hospital at this time of the flu, and nobody's out. I mean, I haven't had any hospitalizations this year." And I thought to myself, I'm not sure I can take credit for that. The next year, the same thing happened. So we sent out a questionnaire to all the sisters, and we said, have you noticed any difference in your pulmonary health since you moved in the building? And we got this overwhelming response. It was absolutely amazing. It was, I used to sleep sitting up in a chair. Now I can sleep lying down. I used to have 3 inhalers. Now I'm down to 1. I mean, it was dramatic. And there was really no way we could quantify it because they didn't really keep detailed health records from before. So everything was kind of anecdotal. And so we tried to think as a team. Scott and I were puzzling, and what was it that we did there? And so it was low VOCs. It was a green cleaning program, which I suspect is a huge contributor. So there was, in a convent, cleanliness is next to godliness. So, layers and layers of wax and cleaners and all that stuff was gone. And then we also had ventilation air. And so those were the 3 things that we could really point to that were, and we didn't bring any toxic stuff in the building either. But it was the first moment that I realized, that the decisions that I make as an architect really do impact people that are living there. And I saw it in a very real way. And in that project, Scott and I went on to calculate embodied energy. And so we were really excited that, and we had heard people say the greenest building you can do is the one that's already built. And so we were just trying to figure out, how true is that? And what did we do here? And we were really pleased because part of the narrative for that story was when you walk through the original convent, there were all these beautiful oak doors and oak trim and hardwood floors. And, think about ripping into it and ripping it all up and putting up drywall and, hollow metal frames was like, are we really going to do that? Mm-hmm. So we were lucky and we found a contractor that would work with us. And so we saved all those doors. We saved all that flooring. We took it all out. We brought it all back in a different configuration of space that now supported the sisters. So long story short, we decided that we couldn't calculate all the embodied energy in the doors and the floors and all of that, but what was just in the shell. And we had some primitive tools at the time. We used Athena, some of the first versions that Athena had. And so we were calculating embodied energy. And so we had the footers, we had the steel structure, we had the masonry exterior, and we had the floor slabs. And so what was the embodied energy in that building? And so we came up with this huge, MMBTU number, which had no relevance to us. And so we started trying to figure out, well, how can we understand the scale of that? And we came up with, it was equivalent to 5 gallons of gasoline per square foot. Or if you can imagine a drywall bucket, deep, full of gas on every floor that we had.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And or the equivalent of 8.5 years worth of energy use, operating use for the building.
There you go.
So that was just in the shell. And that was operating use in 1999. That wasn't Passive House EUI 23 operating use. That was, that EUI is probably like 87 or something.
Right.
So that was a lesson that I learned a long time ago. And then recently I've heard people picking back up that topic of really need to think about embodied energy.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I started thinking about that again. And it was kind of a bunch of things happened at once. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was right at the, I received an email from a friend who's an architect out in California. She's a campus architect. And she said that she sent something from the 2030 challenge, and they said something like, the world is set to build 2.5 trillion square feet in the next 35 years. And that's equivalent to a new Manhattan every month.
Yeah.
And, the pandemic happened and you started to see the earth recover. And it was just this pencils down moment for me. It was like, okay. And I have said before that I think that, the climate crisis is not a technology problem, it's a behavior problem. And I was absolutely convinced that was true. And, the fascinating thing, or the really encouraging thing that I found coming out of the pandemic was I really wasn't convinced that humanity could do it. when I ask myself those deep questions in my most private moments, and you'd say, can these 7 billion people act as a unified front to protect their health and well-being of this place that we call Earth? I would have said, I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. But the pandemic showed us that it was. And so in the midst of all the suffering and pain, for many people, I thought there was also sort of paired with this incredible hope of, yes, we can act when we become aware. And then I started thinking about that and thinking about, why isn't it that we act to stem climate change when climate change is a much greater threat? And the answer has to be lack of awareness. I mean, it can't really be anything else. When we've seen the evidence that when people are afraid for their well-being. So, why is it that we haven't responded more seriously to the climate crisis? Well, part of there's been a lot of disinformation, certainly. And it comes in conflict with some of our own financial interests, right? That's another part of it. But I think there's a lot of it that is just people are so out of touch. They don't really understand how the world works. I think there are huge swaths of our population that don't really connect the dots, that don't really understand how the water cycle works, or, what the implications of climate change really are for them. And they hear stories about wildfires and floods, but that's in somebody else's yard. It's probably never going to come to mine. And so it's hard to make that real. But you see when people make it real that they can act very quickly to change. And that's what was so exciting to me. And I think it's going to sort of change the direction that I've been heading in. Mm-hmm. I have 2 children, and I was reading a book the other day, and they were saying that children of my children's generation, young adults, can't imagine the world, they can't imagine the future. And if you can't imagine the future, how can you step into the world that you want? If you can't see where you're going, how can you move to the place that you want to be? And I think that this is the greatest test of humanity. But I also feel for the first time like we're up to the challenge. We can do it. So it's kind of been a tremendously exciting time for me, but also one of deep reflection. Does the world need more passive houses designed by Laura Nettleton? I don't really think it does. I mean, I think it needs to look at existing building stock, sure. But I don't think, and I think that's essential. I think that's really important to do. But building a bunch of other new stuff, I'm not sure that's really where my heart is anymore, especially when I know that we're on track to build 2.5 trillion square feet of more building,
Right. We need to make sure that is low embodied carbon and passive house. So.
Right. And I'm not sure we can ever get that low enough, right?
Yeah.
So and I remember going to one of the FIAS conference that was in Crystal City and seeing Mark Rosenbaum there give a presentation about the Plainfield School, which was a school that was in a little town in New Hampshire, and it was made out of T111. It was kind of an ugly little building, and it was failing badly. It had mold issues, and its actual envelope was failing. And he and a contractor and some other people who were seasoned professionals got together and advised the town what to do with the school. And they oversaw production, and they did it without drawings. They did it without energy models. They knew what they were doing, and they helped retrofit the school for ultra low cost. And I think that we need to think about strategies like that for the multitude of buildings that exist already. So I really think that we should stop building new. I mean, And if we are building new, we should think about it. Is it an infill? Is it on a green field? What are we doing? And take the time to really ask ourselves, what are we doing? What are we doing with our resources? Are we really valuing them like resources? How are we living our lives? Sometimes I've been in situations on jobs where it's like, okay, I just got site control and we have to get the drawings done in, the other month and a half for approval. And so let's hurry up and design it. So we have, like 2 weeks to design something that's going to be sitting there for 100 years and, unrealistic timeframes and without real consideration to what are the resources that we're using for this. And, what are we putting into it? And collectively as a society, what are we putting into it? Not just what is that individual developer putting into it. So I've got lots of things buzzing around in my life.
So yeah, you mentioned this idea of young people having a hard time envisioning the world, and I think partly what you're alluding to is that there's a lot of fear about the future, and it's easy to imagine the apocalyptic visions,
Right.
So how do we envision that future?
Well, it's
not
interesting.
the apocalyptic one, but one in which people can thrive.
Well, you and I have talked about how paralyzing fear can be, and I think that there's a hesitance to really look plainly at the situation that we find ourselves in. I mean, we are all going to perish in another couple of decades unless we get this done, and we need to stop varnishing that truth. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, is the life that we're all clinging to so wonderful that we can't imagine something better? I just don't believe that. And I think there's lots of things to explore. I think, there's the woman who talks about the circular economy. I forget what her name is. Or someone like Charles Eisenstein, who talks about sacred economics. I think there are ways of existing in the world that are actually much more appealing than the ways that we live in the world now. And I think we cling on to the version of what we know because we don't know anything else. And we don't have the confidence that we can move into something better. And so if we can start to show people there's actually something better to move into, then I think people will go. But if we can't do that, then what's the incentive to change? And what's even the clarity about what to change to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how we emerge out of COVID when we're able again to be with people. I mean, we're so close. Actually, today is a momentous day for us in our household because my mom and stepfather live in Seattle, close to where we live, and they've both been vaccinated. And it's been 2 weeks since my mom's second vaccination. And the CDC, just released its guidelines saying that it's okay for grandparents to visit their grandkids and hug them and be with them. So in an hour, my mom is going to hug my kids for the first time in a year. And so we're going to be able to see people and be with people again, but we're not going to have to go to the office all the time. Or, there are ways that, and we can choose to, and I think a lot of us are eager to not to be tied to Zoom all the time, but we can still choose to do Zoom meetings when it makes sense, right? And right. Not necessarily fly across the country to speak at a conference for 10 minutes or, whatever it is. So I think it'll be interesting to see then. It is a continuation of this shakeup that you're describing, I think, with COVID is, what now? What do we choose to bring back, and what do we choose to leave jettisoned? We don't need that anymore.
Exactly. And COVID is COVID is a gift because it's made us realize what's really important. I mean, the hugs that you're going to be celebrating tonight in your household are what's most important. And it's much more important than anything we do or anything we make. It's how we are with each other. It's really, we need to think about the choices that we make, and we need to make different ones, and we need to act quickly. but we can do it. And that's what's really encouraging. We've seen that we can do it, and we can see how fast the earth recovers. I mean, it recovered significantly. Now, to take us down in the trenches again, I read recently in The Guardian that the amount of energy reduction we had and emissions that we had with COVID, in order to hit the targets that we need to do that every 2 years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's both a behavioral problem and it's also a systemic, like energy system problem that does entail technology, right? I mean, I don't think that we should sit around and wait for a technological miracle, for sure. But I think part of what gives me hope is that all the while, as we do this behavioral change, hopefully over time, that we're also moving to cleaner. You mentioned the coal in the energy mix in Pennsylvania. That'll get cleaner, and there will be ways that we're transitioning that improve lives as well, like that reduce air pollution. I mean, remember when we could see
right.
I mean, that was amazing. For a couple of weeks when we really shut down, we could see them. Everybody could see the mountains. Those photos in LA or in India, traditionally places where there's a lot of air pollution, was amazing. So that's the kind of reality. Those are details of that future vision that we can hopefully start to paint for ourselves as we envision that future.
Well, and I think that's what's so important about raising awareness culturally, because everybody needs to do it. It's the people who interact with the soil. It's the people who interact with making packaging for products. It's the people who are building buildings, like, we've been involved in. It takes everyone. People who are involved with food systems. Are you going to buy your grapes from Chile through the winter? Really? Is it worth it? I'm not sure people really make that calculation when they're putting them in the basket. And unless we can raise that awareness, we can't make different choices. But we can see, once we're aware, we can change pretty quickly. And I've been certainly seen big sea changes in my life. I was the second class of women at my university. When I graduated from architecture school, I got my first job in a little boutique office in San Francisco. I was the only non-smoker. Right?
Wow, yeah.
The world really changed fast when we learned that smoking was bad for us, right? Those are things that we don't even think about today. So we can do this.
Laura Nettleton there, talking about how quickly the world changed once we knew something was going on. She's referring to a few previous examples, but also citing the current situation where we have seen rapid change when awareness has been increased. What a fantastic interview, Zach. I'm so glad that you made that time to sit down with Laura.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure, and so much to dive into. And she also has said things just so well that what do we add? What are your thoughts?
Well, as I was saying to you earlier, I don't want to taint this experience for people with my clumsy takeouts, because I think Laura did say this so well. There's so much in there. And I honestly believe my one takeout, it's really a request, would be to share this. If you know people who are studying architecture, students, even builders, show them this. Tell them where they can find this and get them to listen, because there's so much in here. One point that I will that really strikes out with me is the impact that architects have, and it's not just architects nowadays. It's the consultants, it's the builders, it's the or the tradespeople that are involved. But the stories, the anecdotes that she told, particularly say the sisters in the house and their physician saying, "What have you done to none of these women are getting sick anymore." That's real, And I often tell architects that because of what you do and because of how much time people spend in the things that you create, you can't help but have an impact on their health and their life. More so, I think, than doctors and nurses, because that's where you go and see those people when you're already sick. But anyone who's involved in creating buildings just has such an opportunity to influence the life of people that are going to spend time in those buildings. So yeah, I think it's really, really powerful stuff, and should be really inspiring. I mean, I found it inspiring. It's interviews like that make me want to go and become an architect. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm going to kind of leave it at that, because there was so much in there that I would love to talk about, but Laura's just said it so well that I really encourage people to listen to this again, share it with people, and just get some of her great wisdom out there.
Yeah, that sounds great. The only thing that I would add to that is that I'm excited to see her pivot to to even more focus on existing buildings, and I think she's playing a role, as you were talking about the health piece. She's playing a role of healer of buildings. The buildings will be healthy places for people, but looking at the existing structures and bringing her healing hand to them as an architect. So
nice. We'll leave it on that thought. Not out of lack of things to discuss, but as I said, I think Laura's summed it up so beautifully in that interview that I don't want to detract from that. In other news, Zach, what else have we got going on?
Yeah, well, this week at the Passive House Accelerator, we have Construction Tech Tuesday and our Global Passive House Happy Hour coming up, and two great programs on Tuesday for Construction Tech. We have Ed May from Building Type and Amy Fiala from Baxtingue Architects, and they'll be presenting about what we're calling the road to excellence, which is so we've bestowed this on them, this title on them, because we have so much respect for their work, and it's going to be exploring the team connections in Passive House project delivery. So join us for that. And then on Wednesday, we will be joined by Kim Walton at the Global Passive House Happy Hour, who will be talking about preserved wood foundations and Passive House. So that's, the wood foundation arena is, I think, new to a lot of folks, and it'll be fun to learn about her projects that have fused that with Passive House projects. And of course, lots of educational stuff we'll share in show notes.
Yep. And I should also mention that if someone's listening to this down the line and some of these events have already occurred, that's okay, because it's all still available. You can go through the great and growing catalog and the archives. They're all there. So if you do miss one of the presentations at the Happy Hour or the Tech Tuesday, go and check them out, because there's some amazing stuff there. So anything that you listen to, you think, oh, that sounded interesting, don't fret. It's still there. You can go and find it and share it as well. Send it out to other people that need to know about it.
Yeah, just navigate to either the Construction Tech page or the Happy Hour page on the Passive House Accelerator website.
Awesome. Well, that was another fantastic interview for our focus on women during the month of March. So thanks for queuing that up, Zach. Really, really cool. And we will have, of course, got more interviews lined up and coming your way. So thank you very much for listening in. Please do share this and give us a rating and review if you get the chance over at Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.